You're stuck. The income is still good. The assets are real. You've done everything right. But everything just seems to stall. And every time you ask why, you tend to get the same answer come through. Just add more. Do more deals, do more research, get more frameworks involved. And I gotta tell you, that answer can be really misleading. Now, you've got a solid job. You've been growing your earning ability. You've even got some assets which are in motion right now. Still, there's this nagging feeling that something isn't quite adding up. There's a gap. And it's the gap between where you thought you would be by now and where you actually are. If that's the gap you keep feeling, then you really need to keep watching, because what's actually stalling you isn't a knowledge problem. What it truly is a strategy problem. And it definitely is not just try harder style problem. It's something else entirely. And we're going to spend the next 10 minutes finding exactly what that's going to be. Now, there was a book that I read years ago about factories of all things, manufacturing workflows. It was one of the important books that I've read because it gave a name to a practice that had actually been implemented for years. I'm going to come back to this book in just a few minutes and why it mattered so much. For now, there are 3 things in this video. First, we're going to start by naming what this trap actually is. The reason adding more never seems to move the needle. Then I'm going to show you the constraints that are holding your portfolio back right now, because there are 8 of them across 3 different layers. Today, we're just going to focus on the 5 that tend to show up the most often. And finally, the layer where most investors will tend to get stuck. Then finally, what is the one diagnostic question that tells you which one is yours right now? That's the gap that we're going to be solving today. Most people think wealth building is just about buying more assets, buying the right property, picking the right stock, or finding the next deal. Wealth building is about working 2 individual mechanisms. One, your greatest untapped opportunity, the thing in your situation that if you actually leveraged it could create a quantum leap in your portfolio. And number 2, what is your number 1 constraint? This is the thing that is holding your portfolio back every single day. Now, both of these matter. And both of these will either be compounding for you or compounding against you. We're going to go deep in the world of opportunity another day. Today is about identifying the constraint, because most investors, they're running so hard at adding new things that they never stop to name what is the very thing which is holding them back. And until they do, even their best opportunities can't compound the way that they actually should be. So we're going to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes naming yours. Here's the trap most investors are in. And they don't see it because everyone tends to be in the exact same trap. They obsess over the next asset. Should I buy property, or should I buy shares? Maybe I should get into the world of crypto, or maybe now gold is a good hedge. Should I rent into private equity? What is the right next deal? That's the conversation most investors are having with themselves constantly, endlessly. It's an important conversation because the asset isn't the answer. The asset is only the vehicle. What actually matters is the purpose that an asset is serving inside your portfolio and whether your system works around it. You can have all the right assets in the wrong system and they don't compound. In the wrong structure, they just tend to bleed. Without the right borrowing capacity, you can't get to the next one. Without the right decision-making protocol, you freeze when it matters most. And most investors, they're working on the visible thing, the thing which is right in front of their face right now, which seems to be the property or the stock or the deal, which is the right next move. And here's what that deal actually costs. Years, sometimes even decades of compounding that should have happened and ended up not, because they spent all of that time tuning the radio on a car with a blocked engine. I want you to imagine your car is running at 60% capacity. Before you go and buy a bigger engine, the question is, why isn't the one running at 100% right now? That's exactly what most investors are doing in their portfolio. Out shopping for a bigger engine. Their existing one is choking and trying to add capacity to a system they haven't even debugged yet. There is a different way to think about this, and it starts with naming what most people never wind up talking about or identifying their portfolio. Now, remember the book I mentioned about factories? This book is called The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt. Now say that a few times. Wrote in 1984. Now he was a physicist studying manufacturing, production lines, inventory, throughput, trying to figure out why some factories ran efficiently and others did not. And what he discovered is something I've been seeing in client portfolios for years. I just didn't have a name for it yet. He called it the theory of constraints. The idea, in fact, is actually brutally simple. Every system, no matter how complex it is, has one binding constraint, one thing slowing down the entire system. Now, you can optimize everything else, every other variable, but the system won't go any faster because it's only as fast as the constraint allows it to be. So you want to find the constraint, fix that one thing, and then the whole system speeds up. If you try to fix anything else, you wind up wasting your time. And that's exactly what I've been seeing across thousands of portfolios. Now I just have a language for it. Over the years, I've mapped out 8 constraints that hold the portfolio back. 8 binding edges, and they sit across 3 different individual layers. Now, the outer layer is where most investors tend to live in. It's the capital layer. Over the years, I've mapped out 8 constraints that tend to hold a portfolio back. These are the binding edges, and they run across 3 different layers. Now, in the center of these is the operator layer. We're not going to spend any time on that today, and the second level is what I call the structural layer. That's the time for another day. What we're going to focus on here is what I call this capital layer. Now, in this capital layer, there are 5 individual constraints, and these are the things that determine whether your wealth actually flows. Now, what these constraints are is simply this. One is a capital constraint. Secondly is a cash flow constraint. Third is your income. And then we have borrowing capacity. And then finally, liquidity. Then inside that is the structural layer, which is how your wealth is actually held. And at the center, as I said, is all about the operator. Basically, that's you, whether you can actually run the system you're building. That right there is the full picture. 8 constraints over 3 different layers. And one of those right now, well, that's the thing that's binding you more than the other elements. Today, we're going to focus on this outer layer, being this capital layer. Because for most investors, this is where the binding constraint actually lives. And until you fully understand this layer, the inner 2 don't necessarily matter just yet. 5 constraints, one of them is yours right now, maybe 2, but one is binding harder than the others. And until you name it, every move ends up being the wrong move. So the first of the constraints is all about capital. This is all about, well, how much physical funds do you actually have to be able to go deploy in the marketplace and actually get started in investing? I want to tell you about a client of mine whose name is Jack. Now, when Jack came and started working with me, he had $20,000 in savings sitting there ready to go. So he had a bit of money. He could actually get started. Now, you might give him the advice, well, you can go and buy some shares, or you can go and start building a portfolio this way, or maybe just sit back and go save more and wait till you got enough for a property deal. Good advice. Jack wanted to go a lot faster than that. So what we had to identify in his situation was what was his binding constraint. Now let me tell you, it wasn't his income, because he was actually quite a solid earner, and he had the ability to be able to grow his income level a lot higher. It wasn't the amount of cash flow. He was stacking away some savings, and he had some discipline already about being able to put together the capital that he had in quite a short period of time. It wasn't his liquidity, and it wasn't his borrowing capacity. It was the amount of capacity that he actually had. Now, so what we wanted to focus on doing was, well, knowing that that is the binding constraint, how can we go and apply an accelerator towards this so we stop this from being the very thing that holds him back? As I mentioned before, Jack is a solid earner. So rather than just going out and spending all his money on some stuff, What we actually decided to do was go and take his strong capacity, his strong earning ability, and go and expand it even later. We explored the opportunity there. What he was able to do, and what we identified, that there was one certificate and one bit of experience that if he was able to get it in his job, it was going to put him in a position to be able to grow his income by about another $40,000 a year. And so that's exactly the pathway we took. It took him 6 months. 6 months later, he had $40,000 a year in extra income flowing in. And then he was able to stack aside his extra $30,000 within about 9 months after that. So from the moment I met Jack to about 15 months later, he was in a position to buy his very first property deal once he combined it with some of the first homeowners grants and such. But here's the thing you need to understand most and foremost. His greater earning capacity was an accelerator, which now was going to allow him to serve him in the rest of his portfolio build. The second big binding constraint is all about cash flow. Now, cash flow and the third is income. Cash flow and income are very distinct. Income is simply how much you're earning from your job or earning from your business. And this is going to impact your borrowing capacity, which we kind of talk about a little bit later on. And it impacts the ability to be able to get how much lending you actually have and what that structure behind that looks like. Cash flow, on the other hand, is by how much physical cash flow you have coming in your life. And that's a variable thing depending on your expenses, depending on how much you're earning for sure, depending on the income that you're receiving from your portfolio. So your cash flow constraint, your income constraint can be very, very different. However, sometimes these two things can link in very strongly together. Megan was one of my clients that I was already working with. Now, Megan and her husband, they had a solid income and they'd bought a first property and they'd done a first investment property and they'd gone and done a few different strategies in the meantime. But then a bit of a impact hit their life. Her husband wound up losing his job. Now, he was in a bit of a specialized field, but he thought he was going to be able to get another job within about 2 to 3 odd weeks, because that's what had always happened before. And so they thought they were just going to be able to ride out this time and there wouldn't be a problem. But if you fast forward 4 months down the track now, he still didn't have a job. And panic stations were starting to set in a little bit. Their buffers were getting chewed up. Their lifestyle expenses were going up just because of inflation and what was happening in the world at this point in time. This is only very, very recently. And 4 months down, we had to start asking the question, okay, well, what else do we need to do about this? And that's when they came and talked to me. Now, the obvious answer was, we need to go get a job. And that's exactly what he went and did. However, it was at a lesser income level than what he spoke about. But the rest of their life was structured around this higher income. And so we had a whole bunch of things that we had to do. Their binding constraint wound up being their income, which then flowed onto the symptom of they had less cash flow in their life. That's the very thing that we had to go and fix. Now, we're going to go get another job and we'll go try and increase the income. Going to go do that. But we need to fix some problems right now. So what we went and did is that we went and focused on the lending structure first. How can we free up some cash flow in their life and create more income from the portfolio? So we're going to refinance back out to a 30-year loan to increase the capital coming in. We went and moved from a principal interest down to an interest only. And we also found some ways to be able to monetize some other areas in their existing portfolio as well, and be able to turn on some other income streams from the small amount of equity we're able to get access to. You fast forward, end result, we went from bleeding money about $1,000 a week at that point in time to moving to $2,000 a month in positive cash flow. And we were able to turn that around over the next kind of 3 to 4 odd months by simply going and restructuring the portfolio to remove this constraint of income, which is flowing onto the cash flow in their portfolio. The next after that is borrowing capacity and then all into liquidity. And again, these two things can link in really closely together. I want to tell you about a client called Diana. Diana came to me with 10 properties in her portfolio already. Her portfolio was actually valued at over $10 million. But there was a problem. She couldn't get access to any of the equity in there, and the cash flow wasn't flowing through in the portfolio yet. So she was actually a deca millionaire. Like, just breathe this in for a moment. She was a deca millionaire, but still was tied to her job because she wasn't able to go and extract the liquidity from the portfolio. The binding constraint, borrowing capacity or serviceability, which is flowing onto the fact that she couldn't get any liquidity out of the portfolio to do anything else. So we had to go and focus on how can we create liquidity to then go handle the borrowing capacity constraint, to then unlock into a level of floodgates, which we're actually receiving now. So what we went and did is that we went and sold one property. That was enough to unlock a few $100,000 of liquidity, which was tied up. We went then and deployed that across some income streams, earning 20% per annum on it, and turned $300,000 into a $60,000 a year income stream within the space of a couple of months. We refinanced the rest of the portfolio, moving back to interest only, and actually be able to reduce the interest rates. Now, across 9 other properties, that was a significant reduction. We went from very neutral in the portfolio to ultimately being $80,000 a year positive cash in the portfolio. Imagine that what that did to their borrowing capacity. That then, when they increased their borrowing capacity with the banks, allowed them to access another level of equity and serviceability. We then deployed it towards cash flow and then into some other things which I call profit pipelines. There was the one constraint which held their portfolio back for about 10 years. We unlocked it in 6 months and turned it into a compounding system, meaning that this area will never be their binding constraint ever again. So the question you got to ask yourself is, how do you know which one is yours? And here's the question I want you to sit with to be able to answer that. If I removed this one thing from my situation, or I dramatically increase its capacity, would my full portfolio compound a heck of a lot faster? And you want to run it against the 5: capital, income, cash flow, borrowing capacity, liquidity. Whichever one produces the loudest yes, that's yours, binding harder than the rest. Now, this is a surface version of this diagnostic, the capital layer. But the full picture, the way I work with clients in a private level, it's 8 different constraints across these 3 different layers. The 5 that we covered today, plus the holding layer and also the operating layer underneath. I've built a full diagnostic to help you to diagnose yours, and I've made it absolutely free. It's going to be 10 to 15 minutes of work, walk you through all 8, and it's going to tell you which constraint is binding for you right now across the full model. And then after that, it's going to produce a 90-day plan tailored to where you actually are. Now, there's a version of me built into this, Todd AI. So when you've got the plan, you can stress test it, ask the follow-ups, work through anything that's still unclear. It's absolutely free, and the link is in your description. Naming your constraint, it takes 10 minutes. Living without naming it, well, that could cost you years. And here's what most people tend to miss. The investor who just keeps adding, they're not making a strategy mistake. They're making an identity mistake. They're still operating like an earner. Earners just focus on adding more. They optimize individual variables. They chase the next thing. Owners, they think very differently. Owners look at the system as a whole. They name the constraint, they engineer around it, they move with precision instead of effort. And the shift from the earner to owner, it's not financial. It's the decision about who you're going to be from here. Naming your constraint, that's ownership. Engineering around it, that's control. Living with the result of that, that's wealth that compounds whether you show up or not, and that's all about choice. What you do with that choice is what actually matters. That's what purpose truly is about. Ownership, control, choice, purpose. In that order, always. And your strategy is dictated by your constraint. So in the end, you're going to find the one thing, you're going to fix that one thing, and everything else, it's just going to compound around it.